All right, we are live and welcome. Good evening in China. It's 5 o'clock or good late afternoon. And wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. This time with Harold, who has been who's known as Harald in China on Twitter X. And I've been meaning to get together with you, Harold, for quite a long time to discuss lots of different things. We interact a lot on Twitter, but the other day you put out a brilliant, what I didn't realize until then, that you used to work for TikTok. So you put out a brilliant insider's view, but we're going to come to that in a moment. I think you on Twitter are going way, way above the requirements. And I'm going to nominate you for a bravery award for the Wu Mao Army, because I think that you probably deserve it now. And I want to start with the question, why did you change your name to Houthi Harry?
Yeah, that's a recent change. It was suggested by somebody who comments often on my tweets, and obviously it's related to the whole Middle East situation where I think Max Blumenthal says it right from the Gray Zone, the great journalist, Jewish journalist. I want to emphasize this at this point. It is somewhat relevant, and he covers the Israel-Palestine conflict very much. And he said it best. I think he said what the Houthis do and have been doing is really a humanitarian intervention against one of the great crimes against humanity of our time, where they don't have the means to bomb another country or attack like the Americans would do if they do an intervention, but within the limits of their means, they really do what they can to stop an ongoing genocide. I hope that doesn't change the algorithm when I use the word here on YouTube, but yeah, I think
it won't affect my monetization, that's for sure.
Exactly. Not in for the money. So yeah, so that's what they can do, and that's how they are working on trying to do a change for the better. And I think that's really worth to stand in solidarity with. They have, I don't know, I think they hadn't killed anyone at that time. Maybe that since maybe some tragic deaths have occurred. I'm not in favor of sailors getting killed, obviously, but the idea to have cost imposed on the West, which supports that genocide, by making ships go around, mainly by increasing the insurance costs so much that they cannot afford to take the direct route anymore. I think that's a really clever way of not harming people, but really imposing a cost on a regime that backs a genocide. So I thought that's really a good thing to stand for and stand with.
About the time you changed your name was the time the British ship got sunk. And until that time, I'd made this point as well. No one has been seriously hurt. No one has been killed. No ship has been sunk. And then a few days later, maybe they were watching me and said, "Oh, we better sink one." I wouldn't be at all surprised if that ship was sunk deliberately, because it didn't seem like they were really trying very hard to stop the ships. All they're trying to do was turn the ships around and send them the long way home.
Right.
For me, it looked like they were doing, I would say, the right thing with the least amount of force necessary.
Well, and still, I mean, the way the West did not condemn explicitly the terror attacks on the Crocus Hall in Moscow, it just shows how little death matters if it's against our enemies, so to speak, not ours, not my enemies, but the enemies of the Western Empire. So I find it very cynical if people now challenge me because 5, 6 innocent people have died. 30,000 innocent people have died in Palestine. So I don't want to really start calculating the numbers of deaths. Obviously, again, I don't want to endorse that. I don't want to support the Houthis or Ansar Allah to start killing people. But even if that happened, it's just in no relation to what numbers of death we are absolutely willing accept as the West in order to maintain the hegemony of the West. And I think that's a very important message that stays up nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I approve, and I can't do a Houthi Jerry or Ansar Jerry. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it works well as well. So that's
the other person who constantly changes his name is Kurt, who's currently He's changed his name to the podcast as a something, but he used to be Elon Musk. That's a guy called
Oh, you know
Kurt
that. Yeah,
Explores.
I see comments from Elon Musk. I wasn't
Yeah.
aware who that
He's
is.
changed his name to the China. It's a group of initials, the China podcast or something like that. But anyway, he's
Okay,
changed his name again. He's always doing it. But he was
right,
Elon Musk for quite a long while. I
right.
know Kurt. I've met him a couple of times. I actually was involved in a language school that he used to work with in Hohhot in Inner Mongolia. I met him up there twice.
Wow,
Anyway,
nice.
let's move back to China and what we were talking about. You made I'm going to refer to, I've got some pictures of your tweets here. I haven't got
Mhm.
them on here, unfortunately. I'm not that tech savvy. You referred to a tweet where it says a Chinese woman, Li Juanchun, in California was caught using fake postage to ship millions of packages, and it cost UPS $150 million. So then you said, well, look at this China hater emphasizing that the California lady was Chinese by the same Chinese type immigrant they celebrate as proof about how China is and how the US is much better. So this is someone who's left China, gone to the US, and is now a criminal. Is
Right.
that what this means?
That's how I understood the whole headline, and I didn't even dig deeper because to me it was a tweet that was about the headline, and it was a very like headline catchy. Oh, see the Chinese do evil things here in the U.S. And I guess one hypocrisy that I'm always fighting against is this idea of taking China as a monolith, then take everything bad that happens in China or is done by some Chinese people and condemn China and the Communist Party for it. And if ever anything good cannot be denied from China, then that was an individual who went against China, basically, or was like, despite China, this has happened. So this method of propaganda, that's something that I'm always very, very much opposed. And in that specific case, obviously, the idea is there are people saying now with the immigrants that enter the US from the southern border, there are some Chinese among them. They're a small minority compared to the large number of people from Central and South America, which is geographically obvious. And I mean, we don't need to go into that whole immigration topic, which is very, very strange overall, what happens there. And yes, but there are some of them who are Chinese. They're not large numbers compared to the overall number of immigrants. They're not large numbers compared to the overall number of Chinese, including also of Chinese who go abroad and return to China. But there are some Chinese in there. And then there's some people who say like, oh, that's spies, that's PLA soldiers that infiltrate the US and they're sent by the Chinese to go in there. I mean, I cannot even exclude that. I don't know any of those migrants. So I don't know who's there. I would honestly even say I'd be surprised if no single spy was sent this way by the Chinese secret services or whoever is in charge of spies. I mean, it's obvious that Chinese and Americans have spies in each other's countries. Why shouldn't they? I mean, they have the necessity from a security state perspective, obviously. I'm also very convinced there's a not small group of Chinese criminals who go that way, and they may well be criminals in China, that being a reason why they want to leave because they get in trouble in China, and so they want to go somewhere else, and they're not shy of using criminal networks to find a way into the US illegally. And obviously, they're not going to be then in the US and suddenly say, like, oh, now here's everything freedom, freedom and happiness. So I'm now a good person and never do anything bad anymore. That's just usually not how people work. If they use illegitimate means to get there, they will stay in touch with the people who they met on their way and who have helped them to achieve what they wanted past all laws in China and in the US. So why should they suddenly respect American laws once they're in the US? So obviously they're not going to be working in the interest of this kind of mainstream American society. And but at the same time, I really want to emphasize the point as well. They're not the people who are welcome inside China as well. So I see a lot of hypocrisy among China haters. I call them, just like you call them China expert, because usually the ones who are called experts by Western media, they're basically the same crowd as the China haters, and not much expertise about China there actually. Um, those people, they always complain that there's too much supervision in China, and then they're all angry that there's criminals coming from China. Well, what do you want? Like, if you want to, if we want to prevent crime, then you need supervision, then you need a security state, and you need to do things to keep them in check. And yes, sometimes it's amazing how ingenious Chinese are when they do criminal things, like the scale on which they do it. I've recently seen reports about like casinos that went bankrupt in Cambodia that were rented out by Chinese gangs, and they operate like stories of people who sit at computers as operators and do nothing but scam people. They scam Americans, but they also scam Chinese.
Yeah.
And it's hard to scam Chinese because you need to do a lot of things so that Chinese authorities cannot track you down on the Chinese social media. Because if you normally register, you need to register with your ID card, and then your ID card, if there's crime done with that number, you're never going to get on any social media again. So those scammers, if their ID is exposed, they're then really the ones who get those social credits, not for like crossing a red light, but for scamming using online forgery and tricks and all kinds of things to scam large amounts of money from innocent people. And they're never going to take a high-speed rail. They're never going to take an airplane inside China anymore. But somehow they still are capable of doing these scams, which I find, like, as despicable as it is, it shows how like professional some criminal gangs from China or in China are. So if you don't want them to come to the US and to Europe and to other places to use their professional crime and very strong criminal drive to do these things, well, you better work with the Chinese to keep them in check and to make sure that they get what they deserve. So you cannot have it both ways. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, you want to have total freedom for them in China, but then you complain when they use the freedom to do things that you don't like.
Right. I just done some research on this today and yesterday, and I found something very interesting. China has literally gone into the phase of zero crime, according to Statista. In 2023, crime was reducing from 21 to 22. It reduced 22 to 23. It reduced, and they've just reduced the figures, and they can't round up to 0.5. They can only go to zero. So the number of murders, technically, the number of murders in China is now zero. The number of violent crimes is now zero. The number of home invasions, burglaries, robberies, zero. And what they've done, in fact, it is so low. The only place where crime is increasing is internet scams, and it's online crime and mobile phone crime. And most of it, as you just said, is coming from places like Myanmar, believe it or not, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So these are people who speak Chinese, trying to scam Chinese people and not using Chinese phones, because, as you say, it's very, very hard to use a Chinese phone. So a couple of questions that have just come up. We'll come back to yours. First one, let me get this one out of the way. This is a green screen. This is a village in Hainan Island. It's made of volcanic rock, and I was there. I'm going to let you answer this one, Harald. How does one qualify as a China expert? Because I reckon you and I are probably about as close as we can get, but I'll never call myself an expert. How does one qualify?
I just hope this comment doesn't mean the China expert in the sense that I just used it. So there's two ways. You can really go to China, look at China, learn Chinese, read the Chinese political theory. That's what I'm doing. Really try to understand how does the Communist Party lead this country in order to understand how the political system works as well. And to understand what Chinese people see from their government and from the governing party. So this is really how to understand how China works. And when you do that, you realize that China is neither as opaque as it's supposed to be according to Western media, nor is it as surprising and unpredictable in terms of development. You actually find a lot about the the future development explicitly written in all these Communist Party plans. And when you go back and read those similar plans, like the 5-year plan or like major policy shifts, you read them 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you will find that most of what's written in there is what's happening. So there's not that much surprise happening. Obviously, China is very flexible and pragmatic in the very, very small, short-term, detailed approach to things, depending on how the environment shifts as well. But when it comes to the long-term strategy, it's laid out pretty transparently, and they're working hard to implement it. And then I said there's two ways. The other way that you can go is just hate everything about China, interpret everything in the most cynical and negative way that you can, and then you will quite quickly get interviews from Western media. So that's the way to get the official label of China expert.
Yeah.
And
I think you got
as
to
my
write a book first, haven't you?
well,
Write
the books also come after. I mean, book deals is a way of bribing politicians in the US, the most irrelevant, boring third aide to some second class political government employee can write a book and get $1 million for the book deal just because that's how you pay your way into politics in the US. But I think what I have as case in point is definitely Gordon Chang, who's been wrong every time for 30 years. He's predicted the downfall of China next year, the downfall this year, the downfall next month. He's even once put a date and it came and went. And he still gets quoted as the China expert. So obviously, as long as you hate China, you are the China expert in Western media. So that's the other way to go if you don't want to learn and read.
Yeah. So you write the failed book, get interviewed by Fox, and you're away. Good career move.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move back to my questions that I had here. I noticed that you're wearing something very unusual today, very creative. And the question I had next was about innovation. It says,
Right.
we're living in China. You and I see innovations on a daily basis, but people online keep telling us Chinese people can't innovate. And then there was a great little comment. Somebody said it's because of the cramming that they do at school and all the knowledge that they have, they're unable to be creative. You had a really interesting take on that. Can you remember what you said?
Yes, so there's many points to this question that you've just posed. I want to first start here. So yeah, what is this? This is called Hanfu. It's a kind of traditionalist clothing. It's not real traditional. It's taking
Let
elements.
me just move
from
back a little so we can see more of it. There you go.
So it take where do I move? It takes
Beautiful.
elements from traditional China, like these button or knots rather than buttons. That's like a traditional thing that clothes used to have. The painting elements from some traditional Chinese painting, and it mixes these and plays with these elements to create the modern style that's fashionable for nowadays people, using old Chinese elements to it. And I think it's very beautiful. There's a ton of options right now that come on the market. These Hanfu, they're quite popular now, mostly for women, but increasingly also for men. There's options available. And so that's the very like detail. It's a creative thing, and it will come more and will show, just illustrate on a daily basis some creativity of some Chinese. But on the very, very big picture, of course, I think there's a huge misunderstanding among many people regarding the meaning of innovation. They confuse it with creativity, and even creativity, there's some aspects to it that people get wrong. So first of all, what's innovation? Innovation means you take something to use it in a new way, or to use it for the first time to solve a new problem. And innovation can take many forms. It can be that you take an innovation that's already there, or an invention that's already there, and you find a new way to bring it to market in scale so that a lot of people can use it. That's an innovative application of an invention. Or you take something that's already available, like a touch screen, and then you make it into a cell phone that has only screen without any keyboard. That's what Steve Jobs did, and he was this famous innovator for this, creating the first iPhone, which didn't have any or much technology that didn't exist before. It's just he applied it in a new way to solve a new problem, and that's why it was very innovative. So innovation doesn't always need creativity. But now let's get to creativity as such. again, there is, I think, especially in the Western world, this idea, and I think it's in the end, it's religious. It's the idea that there's a God above who sends us new ideas into our brain that come just from nothing, or from God, or
Mhm.
from just not there, and now it's there, and you're the one who made that happen from not there to there. In reality, how people are creative is usually that they see and feel and get impressions from various things from reality, and they combine it in their brains, and they may combine it in a way that other people haven't combined it in this way, and that's why other people find it very novel. But it's hardly the case that a person just comes up with something that has absolutely no connection to things that have been there before. So usually it's by learning a lot of things, by combining them in new ways, that's how you create novel ideas, and that's how you're creative. And I think what you referred to is, I saw this video, and I'm not the one who discovered it. Somebody sent it to me as well recently, and it's a 9-year-old video, which is from a Danish research that was using
Mm.
scientific methods to research in like a randomized study using a number of students, to just compare with a very simple challenge. So they have like two half circles, where in these half, on a white paper, and they should try to draw as many different drawings within these circles. And it's not limited that it has to stay within the circle, but it should use, or it can use the circles. I think it's not even explicitly that it has to use the circles, but it can use these circles. You can use them to create images. You can use them as the tail of a fish, or as the outside of something that's in those two half circles. And then they check how many different ideas, not just like variations of the same idea, but how many completely different ideas, how to use those circles to create a picture, do people come up with. So that's kind of the test for the creativity. Rather than an IQ test, it's a creativity test.
Mm.
And the assumption, the video is very well done, because it starts with the assumption of the Danish students, and they all say what you just mentioned, like, oh, I'm sure we Danes are more creative because we have a lot of free time. We get to explore ourselves. And the Chinese, they're always sitting in class, they're always studying hard, they're always learning, they have no time to develop the creativity. And as you can guess from the setup, the result is the exact opposite, where it's just the fact that Chinese have so much knowledge, much more knowledge than the Danish students in their teens. I think they're probably 14, 16 years old. The Chinese have much more knowledge, much more diverse topic knowledge, which they then can employ for their creativity. And as well, they're more mature in a way that they just take the task more serious and just do things. And the one thing where the Danish are much superior to the Chinese is in terms of sexualized content. So that's where the Danes come up with many ideas what two semicircle could mean in a sexual context. I'm sure we all can. And the Chinese at that age simply don't. They didn't have any of those pictures, maybe because it's school related and they wouldn't dare to come up with these ideas in a school context. But overall, the result was very clear that the Chinese were more creative. And I think one reason is, as they explain in the video, is because they just have more knowledge, and knowledge
Mm.
allows you to combine more things into new ideas, and creativity needs this very strong foundation of factual knowledge. Another thing that is my personal observation that I think is another reason is the way Chinese are taught. Yes, the teaching is very frontal. It's very teacher standing in front, telling you what you need to know, and you learn it. But you are free in the sense of nobody asks what you think about the things. You don't discuss your opinions. And this gives you a certain freedom because it allows you to really delve into your worldview, your values, because they don't get challenged. If you always discuss your values with each other, it may lead to cohesion within a class, that in the end everybody has a similar worldview. And that's, I think, very important for the liberal democratic system where everybody decides on everything. So people need to somehow align these values.
Mm.
But by aligning the values, it also limits the range of things that you're allowed to think, because extreme opinions will quickly get attacked and socially attacked. And, for teenagers to be socially attacked for having the wrong idea, that's a really horrible thing. For most teenagers, like very few, and they're sociopaths, it's basically, who don't care. Most other teenagers will care a lot what their peers think about them. So the more you discuss your values and views of the world, the more you will align them and get to similar viewpoints. Whereas the Chinese who don't discuss their own opinions in class because they only learn what the teachers tell them, they can really develop their very, very diverse ideas of how the world works, who they are, who the other ones are, how they deal between each other. And the only thing that's regulated culturally is from Confucian, tradition, that you have to respect your teacher, your parents, you have to be polite to your peers. You shouldn't interfere into whatever they do as long as they don't directly really impede you by like keep you from doing what you want to do. So there are like these social norms and regulations what you shouldn't do, but within the limits of not disturbing the other, you can do everything and think everything, and nobody will challenge you. And I think this leads to a very big diversity in opinions in Chinese. And a lot of Western people are surprised when they find out that some Chinese support Trump, some even have neo-Nazi views when they go to the West. In Germany, there's some Chinese migrants, and they state things that I'm like, dude, like, what kind of people are you around that they tell you the Holocaust wasn't real and these kind of things? Where I'm really like totally cannot accept these views. But I understand for Chinese, they're used to just have their own viewpoints and not care what other people think, because it's not discussed often, like, what's your view, what's my view? Because anyways, I don't decide on foreign policy in China, so why should I have an official viewpoint on how foreign policy works? So in consequence, what I'm saying is, like, most Chinese have good views, by the way. That was a drastic extreme example about this Holocaust denial. What I'm trying to say is, because Chinese know that they're in charge of only a limited scope of things where they really decide for others, they're very free to have extremely different worldviews about everything else. Like, should China invade Taiwan? Should China invade the Philippines? Punish Japan for what they did in World War II now, using nukes or whatever, extreme views. You can have them in China because you're not going to be the one who makes the decision. And that's why you don't need to teach the other one that these views are wrong, because anyway, the other one isn't the one who takes the decision either. So I think you find actually a lot of political and ideological diversity within China. And that's maybe what makes it so difficult for the Communist Party to keep the whole country aligned towards the center of the party. And that's the context that you need when you read from Xi Jinping, like all these statements. We need to make sure that the entire party follows the center of the core of the Communist Party, which is Xi Jinping. That's not about Xi Jinping, I want to be the dictator. No, that's about the guy who leads the Communist Party in Inner Mongolia or in Hunan. They're thousands of kilometers away. They're or thousands of miles as well, if you want to use the US system. They're really far away. They live in a completely different context because the people there, most have never been to Beijing. It's very far away from them. And it's very easy for them to go in a completely different direction than what the party thinks, what the center of the Communist Party at the moment thinks is a priority for the country. And to have this alignment across the entire country with a Communist Party that has 100 million people in it, that's extremely difficult. So the emphasis that you shouldn't just go after what you think is good, but you should also read what the center thinks what the Politburo thinks is important for the country right now. And then you should also combine it with what you see locally in order to make it applicable for your local jurisdiction. So that's the hard task for Communist Party leaders. I'm drifting away. What was your question again?
You're doing okay. There's a couple of comments here about how insightful that is. Someone asked where you come from. I don't know where you come from.
So I'm from Switzerland originally, and I have lived in Switzerland, studied there until university, and I've been living in China for the last 10 years. I've actually lived here. And first time in China was 2006. So that's now 18 years since I first.
So the last question that came in is, where is he residing now? I think he left China already. The answer is no, you're still in China.
I'm currently in Shanghai. Yeah, I left Beijing. Maybe not forever. I really like Beijing. I'm currently in Shanghai for a job. which I don't want to talk about, not because it's anything that I have to hide. It's just I don't want to get my current company implicated into my political views because they're not related to my company. I used to work at TikTok before, as you said. I've said that publicly in tweet because that's now more than 2 years ago. So I feel comfortable in saying that, and for political
Okay,
reasons,
well,
I think.
let's come back to TikTok, because that's the main reason we're here, because of that TikTok thread. But I have one more topic I want to come at you with, and that is, and it's developing right now as we speak. I was just online looking at what's going on in New York, and there are massive amounts of police moving into campuses there. So let's touch on that. Sydney University in Australia has got a tent city inside the campus now, and they're saying the same thing. We would like the university to cut off all the connections to Israel, and amazingly, how much work is being done in Australia with the Israel Defense Department, more than has ever been done with the Chinese Defense Department. So this is a huge thing going on at the moment. You had a little take on it about this. I'm just trying to read what it was that you said because it's too small. If the US is democratic, something about the implications on their democracy there. I made a video just the other day about exactly this. I don't see this as an issue of free speech. I don't see this as an issue of democracy. I see this as an issue of oppression. They have no free speech, have no democracy. What's your take on it?
Yes. So again, I like to use provocative statements to make a point very clear. In this case, I think what you may refer to, I made actually a point to say, like, I don't think any of these school encampments are anti-Semitic. I actually see a lot of Jewish that are openly Jewish. They also make statements that we're like Jews for Palestine, etc. So there's a lot of Jews amongst these protesters. But even if they were complete anti-Semites, and recently there was like this false flag that, again, I saw Max Blumenthal talk about this, where a Jewish guy holding an Israel flag as a counter-protester, and in a moment where the protesters have like this short moment of silence, he said like something like "kill all the Jews," and they made it like they afterwards said like, oh, at these protests things like that get said, so that shows how anti-Semitic and dangerous they are for Jews. First of all, it wasn't the protesters who said it, it was a counter-protester who did like this complete false flag to say this statement. But second of all, and I think that's the main point, I don't think that's illegal in the US. Like, as crazy and wrong as it is, I don't think it's against the First Amendment of like having free speech. It would be illegal in Germany, I know that. Also in Switzerland, we have laws against racism, we have laws against anti-Semitism, and certain things are just not allowed to say in Europe.
Yeah.
In the US, you're allowed to say that. And it's very strange to see, you could easily say these things like kill all Chinese, kill all whatever nationalities, death to Arabs, bomb Iran. Famously, was it Mike Pompeo or who said that on TV?
Yeah.
You can say all these things, right? You can call for killing of people all around, but in this specific case, it justifies for the mainstream media in the US to send in police into university campuses and clamp down on peaceful protests, clearly very peaceful protests where nobody gets hurt. There's also this video of a rather odd woman wearing a t-shirt saying I'm a Jew, and nobody cares about her, and she's like, dox me and attack me, and just nobody cares about her. So it's really peaceful protests, and they get clamped down by police because they go against Israel. And it just shows a very, very strong double standard that's very crazy. And to be honest, I'm not even a free speech extremist. Like, I'm not a free speech purist. I think any system of a society has a right and an obligation to set the limits. Otherwise, it's not a society anymore. Otherwise, in my view, it's just a group or a number of people that happen to live in the same area. It's somewhere between anarchy and tribal fighting. So I do actually like limits on free speech. Minimize the limits as much as possible, but I think it's legitimate to have some limits. But if you say you have absolute free speech because that's the basis of your political system as it is in the US, then you cannot just say, well, we make some exceptions here and some exceptions there, because then it's not the same political system. So if you have a system that limits free speech, you need very different ways of checks and balances than a system that says everything can be said. And the US has now the problem, and I think that's one of the things that I hate the most, that's hypocrisy. The Chinese never said that they have unlimited absolute free speech. They have a provision in the constitution where they say you have free speech to voice your grievings. And that's very important, to say, like, whatever you feel limited, unfairly treated, or something dealt in a wrong way by government or by companies or by other people, then you have the right to say that. But you don't have the right to say anything, anywhere, everywhere. That's a very different concept of free speech. And if you say you have that concept of free speech as the US says it does, then you should act accordingly. You cannot just clamp down if it goes against those people who give the most money to the politicians.
Yeah. There's another aspect of it. As a former long time ago police officer, I have had to make decisions on whether or not something was appropriate on the street on my own and make that decision. So
Right.
I've actually been in this position. UK, where I was a police officer, has freedom of speech. People can say what they want. I remember there's a stated case actually where somebody was walking along with a T-shirt that said "fuck the police," and he got arrested
Right.
by a police officer, not me, another one, and he was taken to court for offensive behavior. And the court said, well, no, this is not really offensive. I mean, the judge probably thought the same, fuck the police. So from that moment on, it was free reign. Anyone could just say, fuck the police. And in England, you get the double fingers, fuck you. And this is going on, and that was quite acceptable. It may not have been acceptable to us, but it was acceptable to the system. And what does happen, though, and there was a great example of it at the coronation of the king a few months ago, where somebody stood up in the crowd and shouted, "He's not my king." Free speech, everybody said. He got arrested. He got arrested, not for the freedom or the lack of free speech. He got arrested because 100 people were turning on him and just about to kick his teeth down his throat. They were really angry. This is a coronation. Keep that for yourself. Don't come to a coronation if that's how you feel. So hundreds of people were going to turn on this one guy. So they arrested him. And this is called preventing a breach of the peace, because literally he was going to get hammered. So they arrested him, not because of the free speech, but because of the reaction to the speech that he said would have been a breach of the peace. Now, a breach of the peace could be anything from, just a minor scuffle to the entire street gets burnt down and 10 people die. That could be a breach of the peace, but that could all start with one man doing the wrong thing. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind when we're talking about the lack of free speech. The other thing is when your campus rules, and the campus rules may say you cannot step over these lines. Again, that's not free speech. It's not about free speech. Same on this platform. We can't say things that YouTube don't approve of.
Very well said. Yes. And there are limits that YouTube sets and all the US social media, which are not actually appropriate in Europe, where we wouldn't set the limits. And I'm thinking especially of nudity, where Europeans are more liberal than Americans, where we just tolerate a certain level of nudity, namely female breasts, is not something that is considered very, very extreme in Europe. So that would be something that I think normal European social media would be much more lenient against. Maybe not if it's in a clear like pornographic sense, but at least showing protesters that go nude or something like that. I think you can show on European media, but we just take over the American values because we don't have social media in Europe. And that's for me a very, very strong argument for having either very clear rules, what's allowed and not allowed on social media in my country, or for having your own social media from your own country. And I think one thing that you just touched upon that is also very interesting is a very different value from free speech, which is the value of dignity of the country. And I know this sounds very right-wingish to some people who think countries shouldn't exist at all, and we're all just humans and whatever. but I think a lot of people do attach a great sense of pride and belonging and identity to the country they live in and they're born in and they're from, and even migrants, the country that they've migrated to and endorsed and started to love. And if you just allow anyone to use any kind of slurs and attacks against the country and the people who represent it, like a king, like a police officer, it leads to a degradation of like the social morale. And you
Yeah.
know, I don't mean this in a sense of like extreme patriotism or anything. I just mean it in a sense of also respecting those people who get a sense of pride from being members of that country. And by not respecting any social values and just putting everything on single individuals, I don't think the West is on the right track. I don't think humans are meant to be just single individuals. And you see this, how many people understand that insulting one's mother is very offensive. But
I
why?
think, yeah,
Again, if we say people are just individuals, you're not your mother. Why should you care, right? I don't care if you insult my mother, to be honest, not because I don't love her, but because I know it just doesn't touch her. She's not going to read your comment. So she's not going to be offended. Then why should I care? I know you're just an idiot. So why should I care?
fair enough.
It's the same
Now, I
idea.
just,
Some people hate insulting of my country. So I shouldn't do it if I don't have, like, I can criticize the country for doing things wrong, yes, but not these profanities just against
mm.
hating the country, I think.
Yeah, I think that there's a point at which we kind of salami slice the ethics away one step at a
Exactly.
time. And I just put this up because it made me laugh when I thought about it. Um, if it was a crown court, it's my lord or your honor, and if it's a magistrate, if it pleased the court, got different ways to address these people. But
Right.
if the police officer at the end of the court case, where this guy, the judge says, well, it's okay to say fuck the police, instead of saying thank you, my lord, he says fuck you, my lord. It
Mhm.
would have been contempt of court, but it's okay to
Right.
say to the police. And that actually made me laugh. I was thinking, I wonder what would have happened if the cop on the day had just turned, as he's turning to leave the court, said, fuck you, my lord.
Exactly, then. Yeah, that would
But
have been actually the right response because honestly,
yeah,
like I've had my scuffles with police, I'm not gonna lie, and I've had my arguments with police. But within the people that I was around with, like some left-wing anarchists, punks, communists, all mixed together because we're in a small city, we cannot really, go down to so small interest groups where the communists don't talk to the anarchists because we didn't have enough people. Even though nowadays I feel I'm very far away from anarchy. I think they're not even left wing in the traditional sense, because, anyway, other topic. But what I've always felt is on an individual human basis, I really respect the policeman, even if on a like role that I'm the protester right now, they're the guys ordered to clamp down on our applied for, so it was illegal at that point. I
yeah,
always felt like, I may fight back until we get to a point where we would really have to hurt each other and physically like create damage. And I've always felt like these guys, they're humans too, and they don't deserve to be harmed because they have family. They're trying to do their best. Funny enough, now my brother's married to a police officer, so I have police in my family now. And I really think police have a very, very tough job, especially in Europe. Like, the police in China, they're very respected by the people.
yeah,
So they don't even get to the point where they have to really go hard and protect themselves, their lives, except in Hong Kong for that specific period of time. But I mean, in the US, even worse than in Europe, where everybody's armed and you just ask for an ID card for people who were speeding on the road and they pull a gun on you. I mean, that's a crazy
yeah,
level of pressure. So the least thing you can do is protect them also in their dignity. And because if the policemen go around shouting, fuck you guys, and I'm going to mess you up, then that's going to end up on social media. That's going to be ending up criticized by the media and, like unprofessional behavior and whatnot.
mm,
So don't force them to take all the offensiveness of common people against them, because it just leads to a situation where they get so tense and aggressive that eventually police brutality is a almost certain consequence of a society which doesn't respect them as organs of the state, but rather insults them as part of the state. And if they're lucky, they get some protection from just being human, but as representatives of the state, they have zero respect and protection. I think that's a dangerous situation.
I think you're being a little bit too reasonable there as well. There are, as I mean, I left the police in 1987. It's changed a lot, but when I first joined, it was a place where the people were respected. It was a job that was a good job to have. And then the Thatcher years came, and things changed for me. That's why I got out of the UK. So let's move on. Oh, go on.
Well, I think it's also a self-reinforcing circle, because the more you hate on them, the more only people will go there with a certain mindset, and the worse the police force will get. It's not going to be people with dignity who want to ensure that the state works in a positive way for the majority of society, if they feel that if you work at the police, you're just going to be the asshole who beats down legitimate protesters, like in the Thatcher years, who knocks down the whole workers' union movements. And it changes the force, and the more the force changes, the more it will then make people hate them. And I think France is also a good example, where the police just hate it. And who joins the police in such a situation? It's definitely not people who really want to stand up for the people.
Yeah. That could be a topic for another day.
Yeah, with your background, I think so. That would be really.
We could go on that one forever. I could anyway, with my background and experience. Let's move on to the big one for the reason why we're here was TikTok. I didn't know that you worked for TikTok until you put that long. It's quite a long tweet. I think there's 8 or 10 tweets in there, or X's, posts, whatever they're called now. But it was an informative thread for someone like me, because I'm a complete Luddite. I have no technological experience or background whatsoever. I know how to operate a computer. I'm here talking to you because that's magic to me. You explained a bit about algorithms and the difference between, and this was important to me because I didn't know this, content moderation and content management. So I have 3 questions. Do you want me to give you the questions all at the same time and then let you go? Okay. Why is the American law, why is it necessary, and how will it change anything? How is China's not censoring US speech a problem? And this is something you raised very, very cleverly. And if you were to discuss them, what were the causes? If you're prepared to discuss them, what were the causes or justifications? Because you said you got fired from TikTok. If you're not prepared to discuss them, let's kind of push them away. But those other 2 questions, first of all, talk about content management and content moderation. Why is the law necessary? And how is China not censoring? Because this is a Chinese program and it's not censoring America, which is kind of strange, isn't it?
Right. Yes. So maybe starting first with the technical parts. So there's the algorithm, which is the trade secret of ByteDance, which is what makes TikTok so unique. And an algorithm is really an automated program, like a computer program, which, as it's AI based, it is also self-improving. So it's extremely complex, but on a very simple basis. It's to find out what kind of content you really like, and like in the sense of what kind of content makes you go on watching TikTok. So that's what the algorithm is optimizing for. And the difference between what you like and what the algorithm says makes you go on watching is that you may be the person who loves to hate, like you hate seeing this type of content. And whenever you see it, you want to comment on it, and you want to see if there's more of it because you hate it so much. And then the algorithm will give you all of that, because that optimizes for you going on watching. But the algorithm looks at things like, how long do you watch a video? Do you like or comment on it? Do you forward it to other people? After having seen this content, how much longer will you continue watching TikTok in general afterwards? Is it something you love it? Like, I love painting videos, and whenever I see it, I'm like, I love it, press like, comment, awesome video, and then I stop TikTok and start painting. That would be very nice for me as a user because it inspires me to do something good, but it's not the idea what TikTok wants me to do. TikTok wants me to keep watching because the more people, the longer they watch, the more ad revenues they can make from selling ads. And so that's what the algorithm does, and it optimizes a lot. I think there was a discussion once about facial recognition because it would check your facial expressions, whether you're smiling or angry or what kind of facial expressions you have while you watch TikTok. And I think that was while during the hearing, congressional hearing, I think at some point somebody asked whether TikTok uses the camera to recognize my face, and I think was it Show or whoever was answering at that hearing said that it doesn't save the facial data, and both can be correct because an algorithm can use your facial expression to assess whether you like or not a video without saving your biometric data, which would be a very different purpose, right? Where I understand the country does not want other countries to save the biometric data where your eyes, mouth, nose, the length, and the correlation of these parts of your face to recognize you automatically. You don't want other countries to have that from your citizens because that just is very scary to have this idea that they have this capability to recognize every American with an AI at any moment. And the question whether an AI algorithm should be allowed to interpret your facial expressions, that's another question. Is there some privacy aspect to it or not? And you can discuss this. But what I think is very important about the algorithm in general is it's completely content agnostic. It doesn't say this content is better than that content. It just says whatever people like will be sent to them. And of course, the danger is that things like violence and pornography lead to a lot of people sharing it, being outraged, being shocked, being, maybe emotionally attracted to it. So these kind of contents that you don't want to have on the platform because it may be illegal even to have it shown to minors and whatever, or you just from your branding, you don't want this kind of environment where this is the dominating content because it keeps people with innocent goals away from your platform. For that, you cannot use the algorithm. I mean, you have some AI screening. For example, nudity, AI is by now very good to recognize nudity and will automatically just delete it. Violence to some extent, but that's already very difficult because you take a slapstick comedy where somebody gets beaten in the face and versus a real fight. And it's not easy to distinguish from just the movements. And, like AI is still kind of vague in interpreting shapes and pictures. So that's difficult to assess. Is there really some also cynical speech attached to it? I beat you up and make a dirty joke about it. Is that actual real violence happening, or is it a joke and a sketch? So for that, you cannot rely just on AI screening. And there we get to the point, that's the content, like the content moderation, which some people call it censorship, which it technically is censorship, but it's so necessary. Like the idea of like some free speech extremists who say like you should have any content and let the marketplace solve the problems, it's just not realistic. You'd have so much violence, and this kind of content moderation is such horrible work. There are some documentaries. It happens also with Facebook as well, and like all the social media have these works, and they're usually outsourced to external companies who hire Filipinos or people in like really low wage countries who speak English. And they watch all day, watch pictures, videos of child abuse, of the worst kind of violence, of like real murder, of like suicide, and all these kind of things to check if it's real and if it has to be deleted. And it's a completely destructive job. It's like a job that you do a few weeks, a few months, and you will just hate humanity and you will quit and kill yourself, basically. Like, I don't know what kind of people can keep working on it. It's really tough on people who work in this field. And then there's the managers who manage these outsourced, like really people farms who do the dirty work. These managers, they may do things like define the AI algorithm which tries to automatically filter out what is illegal content and try to parts of it is automatically deleted, parts of it gets sent to those people who have then to use their eyes to assess it. And a third one is maybe wrongly identified illegal content that gets deleted. The user complains, says, hey, why is this deleted? And you have to check and see, like, oh yeah, actually it's not anything bad on there. No idea why AI thought it was bad. And then you put it back up. So these kind of jobs, that's like really the content moderation. And it's really important. But of course, it's very easy to tamper with, because then you say, well, not just violence and nudity is bad, but also anti-Semitism, also criticism of Israel, also criticism of Zionism. And you go down the escalator, and in the end, everything is bad. That's not exactly the ideology that we want to fight for. So it's a very slippery slope, but it's necessary. And then there's the third unrelated.
There's a question just came in a little while ago, which I think meets this, what you were doing there before you go on, if you don't mind. Can you explain the view that the CPC, not the CCP, Big Chills, the CPC is spying through TikTok? So as you go on, could you cover that point?
So I just want to quickly go on the third one, which is something that's most important for the topic of influencing the public debate. And it's also least talked about, because also TikTok actually doesn't really want you to know that happens, but it happens. It happens on all social media platforms, I'm sure, which is content management, which isn't deleting or like fighting against illegal content, but much more promoting kind of content that you want your platform to have. And why do you want that? For example, TikTok would like to have more gamers, because gamers like to use Twitch to live stream their games. And TikTok says that's a large number of young people. They love to watch video games. We would like them to go live on TikTok rather than on Twitch. So we promote that content more than it would organically promote through the algorithm. So we can set up things, or we invite some famous Twitch streamers onto TikTok, and we give them the visibility to make sure the first time they go on TikTok, they get 1 million views and are blown away and love the platform. That's the kind of things where the content management comes in, and they have a huge influence on what's seen. And for the brand of a platform, TikTok has this lively, happy, fresh, young kind of image. They make sure that this image stays by promoting this kind of content. And now what's really important to know is that the content management team for the US is based in the US. And the very simple logic is that they need to be very close to the market. They need to know what's popular in the US, what could become popular, where the people are that have the content that could be popular. So they want to be really close to the users. They want to close to the trends, to the market. And there are large numbers of employees at TikTok in the US who really work about the content, what's shown more than it would organically be shown. And here you have a huge potential to, of course, push left-wing politics, right-wing liberal politics, which I don't consider left-wing, and the whole like election interference, all of that. You can indeed do that through content management. Now the spying, okay, to that question. Does the Communist Party of China spy through TikTok? The question is, spy what? So as I've explained, the algorithm checks what you watch, and that's the huge difference that's also sold to advertisers versus Facebook and Instagram and those traditional platforms. They used to try to find out who you are, like where do you live, do you go to work, where do you go to work, who's on that route where you go to work, so that companies on that route will advertise specifically to you. They really try to find out who you are. TikTok doesn't need that. TikTok knows what you like to see. So it doesn't care where you live. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care about anything, as long as it knows you like to watch this type of videos that are about this topic. And then as an advertiser, you say, okay, I want to target the people who like this kind of topic with this ad because it fits this kind of content that those people like. So in general, I'd say TikTok collects less personal data than Facebook and Instagram. Of course, I think TikTok also requires, no, it doesn't require you to register with your passport, or does it? I'm not even sure if it does. If it requires you to register with a passport, then of course it has the passport data, which the Communist Party could collect of people in the US. I don't really see why they would. I think like everything you post on TikTok, obviously you don't need to be inside the company to spy on that. You can use all internet crawlers, you can download the contents, you can analyze it with all kinds of tools that exist to analyze TikTok content. So I don't see the spying in the sense of they look at what American people like to watch and produce in forms of short videos, because you really don't need to be inside the company.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, like TikTok has the headquarters in Singapore, famously. They always emphasize that. It has a large workforce. The content moderations, those guys who delete content, they're based in Ireland. For all, Facebook also, they all have like their whole content moderation is in Ireland. That's like a global hub. Then the content management team, they are based locally in the US. So where is the Communist Party? It's in the upper levels of ByteDance. There are definitely Communist Party members, and the
Mm-hmm.
Communist Party has this connection bureau where every big company in China, that is actually true. Every big company has to have a Communist Party relations office. And it goes in two directions. On one side, it tells the company, okay, you have to do this and that. You have to support, the development of West China. So you have to invest in that region, or so that the economy develops well in that region, for example. And on the other hand, these people will also analyze the strategies. In the beginning, we've spoken about the center of the Communist Party, right? When they release a directive that says like this and this is going to happen in the future, this is the plan for China in the next 10 years. Well, what does that mean for our company? Where are investment opportunities? Where can we leverage things that we do in our company? What's our strength to support this strategy? Because if you do support a long-term strategy for the country, you can be sure that there will be economic benefits from doing that. Like you invest in West China, then West China becomes more and more wealthy. Then you're one of the early companies that were there. Obviously, you grow with the region, so it's good for you as well. But all of this, that's very much China internal. In terms of international, the Communist Party is interested in improving the soft power of China, the image of China. So yes, they want Chinese companies to export Chinese culture, show Chinese culture in a positive light. But these are like goals on a very high level. And again, they talk to ByteDance upper management who own the product of TikTok as part of their portfolio. But TikTok itself is then managed by a CEO from Singapore sitting in Singapore. It's managed by a content head sitting in the US. So I don't think their influence is very direct. And so this is now my personal experience. I remember what I did say, like I did a project to enable employees at TikTok to make donations to NGOs, and the company would spend the same amount of money to the NGO that the employees choose. It's a very common thing in American companies to basically help employees support the causes they like. And the important part is because the school system in the US isn't adequately funded. So a lot of people will donate to their school, and the company will pay the same amount of money to the school as well. That way the school gets better. In that case, it's a nice thing. But we all know the NGO world isn't just nice and good and helping people. There are a lot of agencies involved in setting up NGOs in order to change the world and shape it according to the interests of the US. And I just said, like, one thing that we as ByteDance need to be careful is that we don't have a situation where large amounts of money are spent into specifically NGOs that target China and go against China. Falun Gong comes to mind, or like, I'm not sure, like Amnesty International, like organizations that really go against China with smears, with lie campaigns, with debunked information. And it's not about TikTok itself. Here, the problem is if ByteDance, as a Chinese company, is found out by Chinese people to spend large money to those NGOs, there may be a backlash from Chinese consumers. Again, this is not about the Communist Party. This is about the Chinese consumers. If they hear, well, the company that runs Douyin in China, runs Toutiao in China, runs the like they have a number of very profitable products in China. And if then the news goes out by the way, the company that runs these products is also paying for American NGOs who target China and smear China to put it in a bad light. And you can be sure, like once a Chinese knows that, the competitors of ByteDance, like Tencent, like Bilibili, like the other social medias, they would push that news huge. They would make sure that every Chinese knows it, because the competition in China is fierce and brutal. Like it's not like in the US where every type of social media just has one product. In China, every social media you have like 3, 5, 4 competing companies. So they will put that out, and it could lead to a boycott of Douyin. It could lead to a boycott of product of ByteDance, and the damage would just be way more than whatever benefit the whole donation scheme could bring to TikTok as an employer branding and whatever. Yeah. And I have said that also to a service provider who would like manage this whole donation thing, because it's quite complex to screen the NGOs, who qualifies, who doesn't qualify, and to handle the cash flows. And I've said to them, okay, we can make a selection of NGOs that employees can donate to, and I want to keep it as broad as possible, but certain topics are just off limits. And I know that when a new head of CSR joined TikTok, she came from another American tech company, and she hated my viewpoint. She was like, oh, we should specifically do and say things against the Communist Party to show how independent we are as TikTok, and statements like this. And I was just like, wow, that's insane. And I tried to tell her boss and higher ups that, these statements are made and that I don't think that's a good idea. And I was then informed that I'm not experienced enough, and that's why I let go. And that came from a government relations, and I just know, like, government relations are the most professional liars. Like, compared to PR, compared to marketing, which both, they lie. Marketing makes normal things sound great. That's a way of lying. PR makes scandals sound harmless. That's a form of lying. But that's all like within the limits of kind of fill your role. But GR, government relations in the US, that's just like you say one thing, you mean a completely different thing, and you just lie your way through, because you also get attacked by lies. I mean, the politicians in the US, they don't care about truth if it fits their narrative. So that's really like a pit of scorpions and snakes. And they were very professional in just saying like, okay, you're not experienced enough. And I was like, wait, what happened? I just got an extra bonus for my first project because I achieved quick success. And now you're telling me I lack experience, so you don't want to work with me anymore 2 months later. And like, what happened? And, nothing happened. No, we just assessed that we need more experienced people for going forward, and that you are not one of them. And you just kind of feel like something is not being told at this point. And that's why I feel that is the reason why I was let go. But I don't have proofs. I'm not lodging an accusation against anyone. I also don't want to name names, because it's my feeling that I was kicked out because of my political views. I also know that as soon as American leaders took over the department that I worked in, I was then told that I had to stop writing political opinions. I used to write on LinkedIn, where it's obviously with my real name and full name and employer and everything. The Chinese never cared. LinkedIn at that time was still fully available inside China, but nobody cared to check, and I had total free speech. And now the situation again, I work in a completely Chinese company, so nobody cares what I say online. As you heard, I didn't just, voice pro-China viewpoints. I also admit that there are things happening against the US from China, to be honest. But I know that a Chinese company doesn't care what I say on foreign social media, basically.
Okay, so the next question, I guess, is I'm going to ask you to predict: will ByteDance sell it, or will ByteDance close it down?
No, I think that's a very easy one, and it's definitely not going to sell. Like, it's not even political. It's just like, from a business perspective, the cost of selling TikTok would be way higher for ByteDance than whatever price they can make from it. And I mean the cost in the sense of backlash. Like, Chinese consumers would just hate the Chinese products of ByteDance for selling out on China and not being tough in this fight against the US, which is oppressive, exploitative. They want to steal Chinese technology because it's, I think, universally acknowledged that the algorithm that TikTok uses is just superior over the Instagram Reels and the YouTube Shorts and whatever the American competitors brought. It just isn't as good as TikTok. And so it's on one side the backlash. So economically, that's the one argument. But there's the second argument, which is the legal situation. I don't think China allows ByteDance to sell this because it's a world-leading AI technology, and to sell that to foreign countries, you need government approval. And in the current political environment, I couldn't imagine the Chinese government approving it.
Yeah, there is a clause in the communications law, I think, to say that the Chinese government has the right to withhold permission.
Exactly. So I think in the first topic is ByteDance economically doesn't want to sell. The second point is legally it's not allowed to sell. And even if they get blocked in the US, TikTok still works in the rest of the world, and it will probably get blocked in Europe because European countries aren't independent. But even Southeast Asia has also a market for TikTok in terms of online sales. I think Southeast Asia is doing quite well. It will be smaller, but the overall profits from TikTok anyway are far smaller than what ByteDance earns inside China. So I don't think it's relevant enough to sacrifice the image inside China. Because selling it would just give a one-time cash flow influx. Like, what's the benefit for ByteDance to sell TikTok, to be honest?
And that algorithm.
And ByteDance doesn't lack cash, like all tech companies, they have enough at the moment.
Yeah. Do you think this will go for 3 years or 4 years through the courts, or do you think they'll just say, okay, we've had enough? In my opinion, the best time to do it would be like a month or even a week before the election. Just say, we've had enough of this. Account will close.
They could do a strike to say, like, okay, we shut it down for a week and show you Americans how it feels. Now, I don't think that it works like this. ByteDance isn't playing with the emotions of Americans. And I know from India, when India blocked TikTok, that was when I was working at TikTok. ByteDance actually spent a lot of time trying to get the market back running, and they kept the entire Indian workforce for a whole year. And I know, like, my colleague was in charge of the marketing India, and they were very grateful that they kept being employed because it was first year COVID, so job market was tense anyway, and they were very happy that they could keep working even though they couldn't do much work, but that they were employed still. But then after 1 year, at one point, ByteDance said, "All right, we give up. It doesn't seem that TikTok is coming back," so we let them go. And it was a hard blow for these employees. And in the US, I don't want to talk about the courts and the options and likelihoods of a success. I think the law is very clearly discriminating against the origin of a country. I think it's a very unfair but also illegal law in the international legal framework. It goes against the rule-based or international legal order. But I don't know enough about the court system of the US to assess how long or if and like how long that can go on and if it can go on and what it will lead to. But what I do think is clear, it will be a very strenuous situation for all the TikTok employees in the US. It will be very, very tough on them emotionally. And if in the end they really have to be let go because TikTok has to close down, it will not be very easy. Maybe a few get taken in if they have some special expertise, get taken in by Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts. But from what I hear, the US social media, they're not exactly hiring large numbers. So I think it will be very tough, and it will be on whoever's president to deal with the blow of another big number of highly qualified, highly paid employees in the US losing their jobs.
Yeah, I believe it's only about 5,800 employees in the US.
Right,
but they
okay.
are mostly highly qualified.
Yes, including some very, very high paid top managers who are sitting in the US. So yeah, it's not huge for the overall job market, but it's for the sentiment in the job market. I don't think it will be a very good thing.
It's also the fact that Twitter let go thousands, maybe tens of
Exactly.
thousands, just a year or so ago. Those people,
Yeah.
many of them, still looking for jobs in
And I
that
think
field.
Amazon as well, and I think like even Facebook, Meta, they're also like none of them are hiring in large numbers. So it's not that
Mm.
they could just be taken over by another one.
They're probably all looking at what Musk did to X or Twitter when he took it over,
Yeah.
and he literally got rid of 80% plus of the
Yeah.
employees. They're probably looking at that and going, "Can we do that? Look at how much we'll save if we do that." And I wouldn't be surprised if there are teams working on doing that inside of Meta, inside of Amazon, inside of Google and Alphabet. So they're all looking at that now. That would be my guess. But yeah,
Yeah.
5,000 jobs lost just before an election. Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I don't think TikTok would do that. Even if they would close before the election, I think they would keep the employees just to see if they're able to deal with the new administration to get it back on. So
Mm,
yeah, I don't think again from the experience in India, I wouldn't think that they would immediately kick out everyone. That's just not
right.
the way Chinese work.
Okay, one more expert question for you before we go.
Uh-huh.
There was a professor. You're the expert. There was a professor on. He's been on YouTube. He's been on TikTok. I've seen a couple of videos of this guy saying
Mhm.
that we're being manipulated by the Chinese because the Chinese support Gaza and we support Israel. And it's because of the Chinese that we're being pumped all of this
Yeah,
pro Gaza, anti Israel stuff, and then producing graphs to show how many pro Gaza and how many
yeah,
anti
yeah,
Israel
yeah,
things. Is that manipulation or is that the algorithm working properly because so many people actually want to see Gaza?
yeah. I think the study is done quite professionally, but the conclusions are completely wrong, in my opinion. And you would have to do further studies or get access to the people who know it because they're not going to tell you. Um, because what it does is it compares TikTok content to a baseline, but this baseline is just two American social media. It's Instagram and YouTube, I think,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe Facebook. It would be three, but they're all listening to the same hand who feeds them. So by saying TikTok is different from the American social media content-wise, that proves that the CCP manipulates TikTok. That's just
Do you think it
absurd,
might be
right?
the other way around? It proves that the US is
Absolutely.
manipulating.
Absolutely, and I don't think that's a guess. I mean, it's more than a guess, and we know this from Twitter, especially from X, when Elon Musk was invited by the Zionist lobby to kiss the ring, go to the wall in Israel, go to a Holocaust center. And again, the evil of the Zionists is that they misuse the horrible evil that was done at the German concentration camps in order to justify doing almost the same against almost the same, not
Mm,
exactly the same. Anyway, so he was sent on that tour, and after that, Twitter also changed its content to follow more closely the Instagram and Facebook narrative, which again tells me that it's most likely those who are manipulated, and TikTok just does less of the manipulation. Also, TikTok has a younger demographic, that's for sure. There's more young
right.
people than on Facebook and Instagram. And younger people care even more about the Palestinians because maybe they've been told that imperialism and colonialism is bad for a long time. So they just took these statements seriously and now they apply them in practice. And some in power do really not like that.
Mm,
So again, yeah, the problem with that study is to set the baseline according to American social media and kind of assuming that they were organic and just a natural outcome of American consensus. Because if we look at professional survey data, there's a clear majority against having the genocide go on, and even stronger against American weapons being used to bombard the people in Gaza. So obviously the consensus is not what is seen on Facebook and Instagram. So that's where this whole study is obviously wrong. And another study that is extremely interesting is studying the so-called ephemeral content, which is things that aren't they don't stay online. And a very typical example is when you do a Google search, you type in just one letter and it gives you the first recommendation what you could be searching for, right? You type a word, it gives you a sentence. And that content, that's actually not something that's just an algorithm that gives you what's most commonly asked for. That again is content management. And again, here Google can manipulate what people will be searching for, and by that, what they will get as results. And there's another professor, I forget his name. He was on the Jimmy Dore show once, and he's really incredible because he could show how just these suggestions in Google searches make a clear difference in a randomized group of testees, whether they support a Republican or a Democratic point of view in a certain question, just by having them exposed to different search recommendations. And they did like lab studies, he did controlled trials and everything. And so it is very much possible to manipulate with the social media, even with simple as a Google search. And yes, that would also be very much possible for TikTok. Now, again, those who are most qualified in terms of authority inside TikTok company are the content management team who sit in the US. So they are indeed in a position that they would be able to manipulate the public image of the Americans, also election, etc. I wouldn't call it interference in that sense because it's mostly Americans who would be doing it. But yes, that is a risk, and I think it's absolutely fair to say America should find legal ways for politics to take control over these companies who have tremendous power over the popular will just by influencing what the people see. But here we get to a really difficult question for the American system, which is based on this idea of absolute freedom and freedom of speech and whatever, where the companies should not be hindered in any way by the government. So then who would check the companies from influencing the public? And this gets very, very complicated philosophically, but also legally speaking, how it should be done. And I think the Americans don't have the answer right now, neither the politicians nor anyone else. And this is again the point where in China, the Communist Party comes into the company to say, okay, you're a company that has huge influence on the public opinion in the country. We want to make sure that you work in the interest of China. And yes, the interest of China as we as Communist Party see it. And that's why you have to listen to us as a Communist Party. And now I don't see this as oppressive as some Americans paint it. I think within the Chinese system, where the Communist Party should analyze the society and then decide which direction China should go for the benefit of the Chinese people and for the long-term development of China, in such a system, it makes absolute sense that the companies then have to support the direction that is chosen by the Communist Party. That in itself, it's not hypocritical, because in itself, it has an inner logic that makes sense. Now, you may not agree with this inner logic, and you're not forced to move to China if you don't like it. But it's not as hypocritical as the American situation, where you say nobody can interfere. But when private billionaires who can buy Twitter or who can own YouTube and Google, they de facto can interfere. And somehow that's not legally in any way managed. And there's not even an idea who should be managing it. But by just saying, well, the people, they can make their own opinion. No, they can't. And that's a really weird thing, where as an individual, always you can make your opinion about anything. Yes, of course, assuming there is free will, which I do believe there is. But as a group of people, as a larger mass of people, every economist knows if prices go up by 1%, the purchases of a product go down by X%. You can measure that, and it's independent of you as a person. You probably don't care if something is more or less expensive by 1%. That's just, 1 cent on the dollar. You don't really care about that price difference. But as long as the number of people is large enough, you can precisely measure the impact of don't.
We just lost Harald for a moment. We
Am I
lost you for a
back?
second.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
Oh, go on.
At the same with information, did I say something wrong?
Yeah. CCP, gotcha.
But the same thing with information as well. So the individual may be quite strong to resist propaganda if it's targeted directly at you as an individual who already has an opinion. But if you don't see certain things and always see certain other things, you start to think in a certain way, and that influences you. And as long as the number of people is large enough, you can manipulate the masses, even if the individual is very difficult to manipulate.
When you're talking of 170 million people, it's fairly large sample
Exactly.
size, isn't it?
Most people don't care about most topics. Like there's so many topics that you can tell me anything. Like you tell me about watercolor paintings. You could tell me anything, and if I suddenly think that's important, I would believe you and say like, wow, this guy told me something that's crazy, like these painters and these paintings and whatnot, because I don't understand about it. I had never researched, I never cared, and I'm very much influenceable. You can really tell me anything. And most people don't care about foreign politics. Most people never cared about Palestine. So what they are told will obviously shape their opinion, even though those who have researched Palestine, I think most will come to similar conclusions like us. But most people don't research this because they don't have time in their life to research Israel. It doesn't affect them, right? And that's where manipulation of the masses is very much possible.
So we're up to 207. We went up to 273. No, that's not a record. I would like to say Harald is one of my most popular guests, and he most certainly is one of my most well-known guests. But I had Lee Barrett on here one time, and he's got 350,000 YouTube followers. So it went up over 600 on that day. But yeah, 200 is very good for me, especially now because it's dinner time in China. And I know a lot of our viewers are in China. The comments coming through don't seem to be coming from inside of China. But we're getting to the 90-minute mark. Is there any closing remarks about TikTok before we do? I got accused the other day of cutting people off at the 90-minute mark. I don't. But normally we discuss this before and we say, let's try and aim for about 90 minutes. But I'll let you have a final say of the TikTok debacle, and then we will finalize things.
Well, I think one last thing that I do want to mention again is the difference between the US blocking or threatening to block a social media because it is owned by a company that is in China, which is very much targeting the identity of the owner, versus China saying if you have a social media in China, you need to respect the limitations on content that is allowed in China, which has to be according to the Chinese constitution. And the Chinese constitution demands that the Communist Party leads China. It's not allowed to question that because that's against the constitution. So China has, in fact, a fair playing field where Chinese social media and foreign social media have the same rules. It's just, this question, YouTube is banned. YouTube chooses not to follow this law in China that certain content isn't allowed. Google doesn't want to accept it. Twitter doesn't want to accept it. So they don't provide service to the Chinese market. It's not that they're not allowed to provide service. Google has huge offices in China. Google is very much present in China. Facebook has sales managers in China because Chinese companies are very much allowed to make ads on Facebook, etc. LinkedIn for a very long time was in China because it was very much possible. If you follow the Chinese rules, you can stay in China. But a very interesting story is Google actually did want to, I think it was called Firefly project. They wanted to do a search engine for China specifically, which goes like ideally according the Chinese, or Bing. Yeah, Bing is another good example. They are active inside China and they can do that because they follow the Chinese rules when in China. Google shut it down because employee protests. That's what I read. Somebody tweeted to me recently that there were more reasons than that. There were some American trade practices, which is weird because Microsoft is American as well, and they can do a search engine that works inside China. So whatever. And Google had recently protests of employees who said Google should shut down services for Israel because of what Israel is doing, and they kicked out the employees, not the project for Israel. So the double standard here is you shouldn't do pseudo genocide where the people get to have higher education. You should actually bomb them. Then it's acceptable for the American minds, or for Google at least. No, but besides all cynicism, I think that's a very common misunderstanding to assume that it's just the Chinese block Americans. Why shouldn't American block Chinese? No, that's not the case. Chinese have certain rules that most American companies don't agree to play with. I think actually Europe should also have rules for social media, not just Chinese social media. Yeah. They should also have rules for American social media, what they're allowed to do in Europe and what not. Keyword election interference, yes, TikTok may have some impact because people see new viewpoints, but the probability that Google is trying to influence Europeans to vote for pro-American parties rather than pro-Russian parties, I think that probability is way higher because Google employees really care about what Europe thinks, whereas the Chinese in ByteDance, they don't really care and often don't quite understand the election processes in Europe, which are more complex than in the US. And so I don't think the Chinese inside ByteDance would use TikTok in order to influence decisions made by Europeans. It's just not relevant enough either. Like I think Sunak was recently quoted as saying the Chinese influence British elections. And I think the best comment was, the UK is just not relevant enough for the Communist Party to specifically.
And you weren't even elected.
Yeah, he wasn't elected. Yeah,
it is a bit strange when you see people like Chris Patton and Rishi Sunak talking about how democracy is being abused in places like Hong Kong and how China is interfering with our democracy. They're not elected. One's in the House of Lords and one was voted in with 206 or 209 votes. That's not how much he won by. That's how many people voted for him.
Yeah, and the Brits had like 70 years or how long, 90 years to implement one man, one vote democracy in Hong Kong. They never felt the need to do that when they were in charge of Hong Kong. They just started complaining.
Not until Chris Patton came along and said, let's introduce it so we can screw around with it later. That's
exactly. Yeah, different topic. I think I would love to do a live stream on democracy once, because I think right now the Chinese form of whole process democracy is very interesting, and Xi Jinping is one who really emphasizes the development and deepening of whole process democracy, and to ensure that Chinese have a say in wherever they are directly involved. I think that's.
I think we can do that. It's a topic that's very close to my heart, but it is for another night, because I think we'll have to put another 90 minutes into it. Yeah. And I want to thank everybody, the 273 people that I had there coming in. It's now down to 260. But also, Harald, thank you. Short notice. I was very impressed with your TikTok knowledge. And I thought, well, I want to get this onto the channel as soon as possible. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your Hanfu, and thank you for your expertise.
Thank you. No, it's great to be on, and thanks for having the opportunity to be on your channel. And also,
no problem at all. And thank you everybody else who joined us for the last 90 minutes or so. It has been good having you along.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.